Opportunity and ask everybody to come by and visit me at Michigan if they want to visit me.
Thank you, Steve. That was a very impressive series of cases. So for the next 10 minutes, I will go through with you the timing of Mama Block. As you can see that this was initially reported in 1970s and has undergone several deaths and rebirth. For a while there was a moratorium out there saying that we should not do this operation. The original paper has been cited 93 times, and you can see the 3 spikes. A lot of folks have advocated now to not do this too early if you want to do this operation. Most of the evidence belong to level 4. So we take a deep dive into this area and look at what are the available evidence. Res ipsa loquitur means the thing speaks for itself. If you really look at the evidence, and you need to decide, each one of you, each one of us. No disclosures. We need to look at the reason, the evidence supporting doing early versus late. That's my main task. But I added this third question because it's logical to think that distraction may have altered this whole picture. But lastly, I want to look at the evidence supporting doing this surgery at all. Like everything else we do, the outcome justifies the means. And the outcome can be divided into the functional or the morphological components. Let me remind everybody, surgery is not a religion. There's more than one way to get to the end point. So your way may not be the only way. There's always constraints. Constraints can be simply explained that when you have one element that goes up or put more attention to it, the other elements must take a back seat. So A plus B equal to C. This is very simple. So short-term gain plus long-term gain equal to constant. So whatever is good sometimes for the short term may not be as good for the long term. We saw that yesterday. Importantly, morphological normalization plus safety equal to a constant. The more you want to do, the more you have to pay in terms of safety. Dr. Whitaker used to tell me, big results require big operations. Big operations comes with big complications. This is a natural equilibrium. I just substituted the production to surgical procedures and safety and morphological normalization. Something has to give. You want to have this one-time correction, you have to be willing to pay for that reduction in safety. Each one of us, with our own background, own training, own experience, must, based on our own interpretation of the evidence, find our own natural equilibrium. Certain surgical operations just have a much lower slope. So, within about 15 years after the paper by Monasterio, Trump published the first series by Jeff Fioran and Dr. Whitaker. Their conclusion was that the complication rate was much higher in Mama Block for the reasons Steve already outlined. The aesthetic result was much worse if you operate early. Based on those two, starting in 1993, they stopped doing this one-time operation. I want to bring your attention to this level 4 evidence. In 15 years, there were 10 Mama Blocks. That means that roughly a craniofacial fellow has a 50-50 chance of scrubbing in one Mama Block. A year after that, this is the paper that Steve referenced to, and after some almost 1,000 cases, Daniel Marshak and Dominic Lanier came to the same conclusion: do it late. Try to avoid the frontal osteomyelitis or osteitis. Level 4 evidence again. After the moratorium came out, by none other than Dr. Kawamoto himself. With the distraction, monoblock found a new birth. Across the English Channel, Great Ormond Street, they published a series of 12 using distraction and saying that, hey, we can do that. With distraction is okay now, do it at young age and with acceptable morbidity and mortality. The patients are very young. I want to bring your attention to this table, looking at the average blood loss. This is percentage of the total circulating blood volume. For those of you sitting in this room, we're talking about 20 liters of blood, which is tremendous amount of blood loss. And look at the operating time and the weight of the patient. Yesterday, a couple days ago, we talked about back of the envelope calculations. This means that there's at least 50% major complication rate. And we can do the back of the envelope spreadsheet analysis, just plot the weight against the percent total blood volume loss. And it's pretty obvious that there is a very strong correlation. You do it young, you're going to lose a lot more blood. To their credit, Richard Hayward and David Donaway follow up 3 years later and show that 30+% will have a deterioration in the airway. And most frightening is that they found that the midface did not grow. You distract it once, just like the mandible, you can write off future growth. So you will not get any cellulonasium improvement. You will not get any cellular to the subnasally. The only thing that grew is from gonium to pogonium. No wonder they all look like class 3. That's why Richard Harper in his discussion mentioned that posterior vault may be a better way to go. And several years later, Eric Matheson's unit proposed that we forego the forehead and the face and go to the backside. They have better Chiari improvement, better papilledema resolution when you do the backside. And the cranium is made bigger. We went over why that is. So, given that the distraction has become a routine, we have to ask this question, ensure that the distraction has reduced the complication for monoblock, right? Wrong. Our course director, Frank Pape, has published a paper just this year with some of the co-authors that are in this audience. What they found is that quite to the contrary, doing a very meticulous meta-analysis, pulling from 15 qualified studies, collecting a total of 363 patients. Again, you look at the number of patients per study, it's just a handful. Highly statistically significant increase in morbidity and mortality, with all the major complications being higher in the distraction group. This goes counterintuitive. There's again level 4 evidence. This is the most important table summarizing Frank's finding, comparing distraction with no distraction in monoblocks. And indeed that the distraction arm has a much higher complication rate. But if you look carefully, another thing that has a very high statistical significance that's different is the age at time of operation. So again, I did a back of the envelope calculation using the available chi-square. I use the age less than 6.5 and greater than 6.5 as a variable against complication versus no complication. And you can find all these chi-square calculators. I just picked the first one that popped up. Statistically, very, very significant. Less than 6.5 years, you're going to have 34% versus 16% complication rate. We have to look at the level of therapeutic evidence so that we can decide which treatment to provide. At the strategic level, you decide which operation to do. Unfortunately, most of our studies are way low in the level of evidence. Very rarely do we have level 3. I came across so few level 3s I can count with one hand. There's no level 2s in reality. But more importantly, one of the 2 therapeutic arms ought to be do nothing. Yesterday, or day before, Dr. Cass mentioned that you need to know what is the natural course. In fetal surgery, the pediatric surgeons did it right. They have an arm that's the natural course. However, we do not have that. We don't know what happens if we do nothing. There are papers out there looking at patients prior to the advent of craniofacial surgery. This was from a paper in 2012 from, again, Erin Matheson's unit. This patient is 20 years old, photograph taken in 1983. It doesn't look normal, but if you can imagine, if we come from an imaginary Buckman land where everybody looked like that, that will be okay. For him, that is normal. But today, we will not leave this person alone. We will subject him to an average of 10 to 15 operations. So during Second World War, fighters came back riddled with bullet holes. And some high brass noticed that, hey, the bullet holes were asymmetrically or unevenly distributed. The wingtips had a lot more bullet holes. So they have a Manhattan Project like, except this one really is in Manhattan, a highly ultra-secret so-called strategic research group where mathematicians, scientists provide input to help. So they ask these people to figure out the pattern so that they can decide where to reinforce the airplane so that they don't get the wingtip shot out. Abram Wall told the generals that's the stupidest idea he'd ever heard. These airplanes came back because they were shot at the wingtips, not in the engine or the fuselage. Those that didn't come back are the ones that you need to pay attention to. And that is the selection bias when you don't have randomized controlled trial. So look at a lot of these publications. Those that are published by surgeons usually say that surgery helps. If you operate early, the IQ improves. You operate late, the IQ is not as good. There's so many confounding factors we may be chasing the wrong bullet holes. They're smart, that's why they brought the child to the surgeons earlier. You look at the effect size, which is the delta mean divided by the standard deviation. It's a very important number. The average effect and decrease in the intelligence is about minus 0.72 to minus 0.44. It's statistically significant, but the magnitude is mild. Another one by probably the best team, Cassie Simon, Matthew Speltz, Michael Cunningham, multi-million-dollar NIH, CDC, all these very prestigious, very well-funded institutions. Their conclusion is that it really did not have tangible evidence to show that surgery helps in the mental capacity. IQ is a very, very quasi-quantitative, measurable variable. Most of the things, just about everything that in biology varies according to the normal distribution. So you see the Gaussian distribution, Gaussian curve. Anything that's outside 2 standard deviation, we call it abnormal. In reality, at that shoulder, between the two, at the individual level, there's no difference. This is the Cohen's d, the effect size index. Good effect has to be exceeding 8. Our ability to correct morphological deformity is quite good. Initially, after surgery, usually you can get up to 2.38 according to the published data. But our ability at improving the mental function, the neuropsychological development is very, very, very low, probably clusters around 0.2. George Washington came down with a cold in a cold Thursday morning in December of 1799, summoned the best physicians to treat him. They did bloodletting and administered emetics. So he puked and he became hypovolemic. He passed out. When he can no longer swallow, they administered the emetic as suppositories, and then bled him some more. He promptly died on Sunday. That is also the same year that the word placebo first appeared in the scientific literature. Hustelian radical mastectomy took 100 years. Just very recently, JAMA definitively stated that radical mastectomy does not improve breast cancer survival. With no bloodletting, with no snake oil. Physicians basically guess, sometimes lie, until we have more experiential background. This is how I was taught, this is what my teachers did, that's what Ken Lin said, the dogma, intuition, and then gradually we become correlational. From that we go to hopefully experimental, where we can do randomized controlled trials. We can know what the natural course is. With multiple RCTs, we begin to understand the mechanics, the reason why, the cause and effect. From that, we hope to one day generate the governing dynamics where we can really understand the laws, and then we can design experiments, refine the understanding. Unfortunately, we're stuck with this very, very low levels of evidence. There's more opinions. So, these 4 questions, we really don't have much evidence that we are doing a whole lot in improving the intelligence. APERT, even in 2006, have shown to have lower than average intelligence, but not by a whole lot, 20 points below. If you pick up a standard textbook of medical genetics in the 1960s, APERT's intelligence average in the 70s. After half a century, we are back at 70s. Importantly, you look at the so-called relative dispersion, which you take the mean divided by the standard deviation. Those two don't give you the same numbers. So syndromic cranial synostosis fundamentally differs from single suture synostosis. Those two are not the same animals and should not be treated as such. The psychologists usually come up with a conclusion that surgery does not really help. They're very kind to say does not negatively impact the neural development, but it does improve the form. So how about the breathing? This is a good paper. Eric Matheson has several PhD candidates that look at this issue. Yeah, we improved by about 55%. There's a multiple resistors in series. Just making the face come forward is not solving the whole problem. Recently, CHOP came up with this algorithm, pushing PDD as the principal component in reserving the monoblock to after 5 years. I think delaying is a good thing, and they show the indication there. Reference number 30 was cited multiple times, and there's a level 2 evidence. So I went to reference 30 and pulled that out. It is really at best a low level 3. And they based their conclusion in that in the group that had a PDD, FOAR rate went down. But then you ask who decides the FOAR? It's the same group of individuals. So this is tautological and is problematic in the design logic. So, based on all of this, what have I learned? It depends on the patient. You really have to have a very severely affected patient like the one Buckman showed earlier. It depends on the surgeon. If you don't know how to do this operation, don't do it. You have to know how to do this operation very well. At CHOP, the possibility of you getting to do one is about 40%, even at the time when you were doing it. It depends on the hospital. You need to have a team that can be all over these patients. Be ready. You need all the infection, CSF leak. So it makes sense to decompress the cranium early, but the early motor block makes your face not grow as much afterwards, if any at all. So if you really want to do this operation, you got to learn how to do it, learn it from Steve Buckman, and learn it really well. And make sure your patient indeed has increased ICP, has an effective reduction in the orbit, and has retroposition maxilla, and the patient presented late, and the patient demand that you do this all in one operations. All those requirements are end. I'm hoping that PED will change some of that. With that, I would like to thank you. This is Frank Capet, our chair, taken some years ago at the knee. I really appreciate Frank's opportunity. It's a great honor. Thank you.
Mark, you're up next.
Was there a discussion on the monoblock, or are we going straight to the 3-1?
Let's open up a discussion. Stay at the mic there. First of all, Steve, you're absolutely right. There are a lot of equations in Jack's lecture.